Seltzer Kings
podcasts.
Imagine being the first person to ever send a payment over the internet. New things can be scary, and crypto is no different. It's new, but like the internet, it's also revolutionary. Making your first crypto trade feels easy with 24/7 support when you need it. Go to Kraken.com and see what crypto can be. Not investment advice. Crypto trading involves risk of loss. Cryptocurrency services are provided to U.S. and U.S. territory customers by Payward Ventures Inc. PVI DBA Kraken. Visit PVI's disclosures at kraken.com/legal/disclosures.
What does an 18-year veteran of the tech industry and a 20-year veteran of the military have in common? More than you might think. Welcome, everyone, to the Second Act podcast, leveling up your life's journey.
What's going on, Michael? How you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty awesome today. I don't know if I've found...
There was a pause there. What was the pause for?
I was trying to come up with the right adjective. Is what I was trying to come up with, and not use the same one I use probably in almost every other episode.
Why are you doing awesome?
I have been really intentional about slowing down a little bit and thinking through things a bit more, and almost getting to like a Zen state. In both doing things for myself and doing things for this podcast, and spending some more time doing some exercise and meditating, reading. So I don't know. I just feel like I'm in a really good place at the moment. How about you?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I'm doing good. It's interesting that you talk about that because, I entered into entrepreneurship a little bit earlier than you did, but we talked about it in earlier episodes, but we talked about that kind of wave, the sine wave, where everything starts and everything ramps up, and, you feel like you don't have enough time in the day, and you start having to block out things that are not producing the value that you want them to, or not, your priorities are in the wrong order. But I love to hear that you're kind of coming off that wave and starting to realize the things that are truly valuable to you, like our families, like our, our relationships, and of course the show. So
yeah,
I'm doing good, man. I saw a quote that reminded me a lot of this show. Reminded me a lot of you and I and our journeys. And the quote is, "A winner is a loser who tried one more time." And again, we've talked about this on the show, but just picking yourself back up, starting over, figuring out another way to attack, figuring out another way to do things in a different strategy, or getting one other person's opinion that may just open up a door for you. So it's really cool. Put things in perspective. As I am parenting and doing the daily things in life, I just think, man, I got to try one more time. But
the question I've been thinking about a lot recently is there's this like hustle culture, like we always need to do more faster. Yep. And I don't understand why. What are we racing toward? Like, what are we racing toward? In some ways, we're racing toward our own demise.
Right.
But what are, when there's putting in effort and energy to create something great. But does it always have to be sort of redlining? I don't think so.
No. And you're right. You get on social media, LinkedIn is the only thing I'm on, but I see it, and it's the typical 10X, 3X, 5X, wake up at 4, go to bed at 11, maximize every minute that you have. And it's a stark contrast from others who are, man, you have 24 hours in a day. Use them to better your family and your kids and your relationships with your spouses and your, it's like, man, but there's a balance in between, right?
Yeah.
It's getting the job done, but it's doing it effective enough to enjoy and appreciate the time you have with your family. So
100%. you always got to remember what you're giving up to get that other thing.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
sometimes that price is high.
Yeah.
Okay, enough on the philosophy and deep thinking at the start of the podcast. Let's jump into it. Welcome back to the Second Act podcast with Michael and John. John, I think you're going to introduce our guest today.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited about this one because this week we are joined by Todd Lancaster, a retired Air Force colonel turned 2-time school superintendent and leadership consultant who is a Colorado native, still calling Colorado home to this day. So one of the few out there. Todd's military background started at the Air Force Academy and transformed into a 22-year career as an aviation officer flying jets as well as helicopters for special ops. In 2011, he retired from the Air Force to begin his second act in the area of public education and professional leadership development.
That's cool.
As a Vistage Chair, Todd specializes in fostering communities of leaders with diverse company backgrounds that are looking to collectively troubleshoot problems, vet ideas, and identify blind spots within one another. Outside of work, Todd loves spending time with his 2 daughters, enjoying winter sports, serving his community through organizations that include We Ride For and Wish for Wheels. Oh, can't wait to hear about those. And sharing his personal stories around loss and forgiveness. Man, that's awesome.
Nice.
Welcome to the show, Todd.
Welcome.
Appreciate having you.
Hey, thanks. Any day I can start the day with a bunch of helicopters in the background is a good day.
Yes, we're overcoming Michael and his lack of aviation.
I tell you,
on his wall.
I've met more pilots through this podcast than I've known in my entire life. So it's cool. It's a cool.
We stick together.
Yeah.
We stick together, Michael, because we have no other friends. They all leave us because we talk too much about aviation and they go do other things. So you're stuck with a bunch of aviators.
That's right. It's good people.
But Michael,
Very good
you've got aviation background though. Doing this with your dad or something in the.
No, I don't have any aviation background. The closest thing I have to aviation is the place I lived before this one. My next door neighbor was a Boeing 787 pilot and bought the house as a rental property, and we got to talking a little bit. But yeah, I've met just an incredible group of folks who happen to be pilots through this show, probably because of John. And it's just it's such a fascinating sort of unique space that I don't know a lot about. So I always love learning about people's experience in that space.
Yeah, and some of the things we even talk about are true.
That's right.
Yeah.
Never let the truth get in the way of a good story.
Absolutely.
For those of you that aren't aviators, just hold on. We'll get into some meat here that's not all aviation specific.
Yeah. Jeremy, our producer, is always interested in really the edges of all of that with, what have you seen while up in the sky that can't be identified? So if you have any UFO stories, be sure to let him know offline.
That's right. Well, Michael, let's get into it, man. I think we've got a fascinating guest.
Yep.
Some great topics. You want to kick us off?
Yeah, let's do it. So Colorado native from Idaho Springs. That's a great place. I've been there many a times. And for the newer residents of Colorado, they probably, especially the out-of-town visitors, probably think of Hot Springs and the original Bojo's Pizza, which is absolutely delicious, for that area as they go to and from the ski resorts in Colorado. That's what they think of. Tell us about life growing up there, Todd, and some of the important things that you can remember from your childhood that shaped who you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny. My family actually goes back in the Bergen Park, Idaho Springs area about 3 or 4 generations. So,
wow.
So we've been up there for quite a long time. And we joke that there's a smart side of the family and a dumb side of the family. And the smart side, our names are down on like CSU and the Capitol building in terms of lots of architecture and engineers. But a great relative up in the Clear Creek area died in the mines falling out dynamite.
Oh, wow.
And for years, we're like, well, doesn't dynamite kind of thaw itself out? Why do you need to do that? Well, a good friend of mine, Mary Jane Lovely, recently bought the Argo Gold Mill, that big rust building that goes up along the side of the mountain.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so in high school, we used to break in there, and that's where we would have drinks and make out and things like that. That's, stupid high school kids do. Since then, they turned it into a museum. And so she said, hey, why don't you just come walk through the museum with me? And then so I did. And she's talking to the curator who works for her at that point. And then I'm just looking around. The only thing that caught my attention was this 10 cube box with cylinders through it. And so I went to the curator. I said, what is this for? He goes, oh, that's how we thaw out dynamite. Like, you're kidding me. You're about to solve like a mystery in our family that's been around like forever.
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean thawing out dynamite?
Yeah.
And I guess when dynamite gets below freezing, it loses its explosive ability.
Huh.
So the miners a lot of times would sleep with the dynamite in their jackets.
Oh
Of
my
course,
gosh.
their huts and stuff are also being warmed by fire. And so every once in a while, those two things, don't mix well.
No.
And so they created this box where they can slide the dynamite into it and pour hot water over it to thaw the dynamite out, so the miners aren't putting themselves at risk. So
Wow.
My gosh.
that's just one example of what it's like to grow up in Clear Creek County and find out like things like that about your family. Like, okay, well, there we have it. The mystery solved.
So you certainly learned safety around dynamite growing up. Is there are there other sort of life lessons outside of mining safety that maybe led you into your decisions to joining the Air Force Academy and serving the country, things like that has sort of helped shape the future years of your life?
Oh yeah, absolutely. When I go back and look all the way through my life, it's the string goes, starts back in Idaho Springs. It's just a small little town. My family, my dad was a aerospace engineer, so we lived up in Floyd Hill, and he worked down in Denver.
Nice.
But most of my family most of my friends lived in the canyon. And unbeknownst to me at the time, they were mostly miners, and I didn't realize they were very well off. For us, going and hanging out in Idaho Springs and the trailer courts is just what we did. And so one thing when I look back, it was just this wide variety of people that I hung around with, some highly educated, some not so educated, some fairly well off, some not so well off. And that just became a standard for me. I never even thought twice, about that. It wasn't until years later when I came back as superintendent and really started to understand the demographics that I realized that, wow, the canyon is a fairly, poor population in there. But once again, those are my friends.
Yeah.
And so when I look back through my career, I always really was gravitating towards smaller units, close-knit units, going from jets where it's the officers flying to special operations where I've got, 20-year-old kids in the back of my helicopter. It was just natural for me to be in that space. It just simply was. And so I could really see that foundation being built back in Clear Creek County and Idaho Springs, just small little groups of friends rolling around the mountains, from all walks of life that just don't think anything of it. And moving into special operations, the rest of my career, that was just a natural place for me to be. And it was just very easy to be accepting of everyone and feel accepted in all these different areas.
Yeah.
Todd, what was the draw as a young child or, getting into high school? What was the draw to bring you down to Colorado Springs and into the Air Force Academy? I know that you said your dad worked in aerospace, but there's usually aspirations that, push kids into one of the service academies. And you found yourself in the Air Force Academy. But tell me about that.
So there's two sides of that story. One's a little more noble than the other one. So I'll start with the more noble side of it. I was probably in about 6th or 7th grade, and that was the first year that women were allowed in the military academies. And a movie came out called Women at West Point. And I watched it. And at that point, I didn't know anything about the academies. But I remember just being very impressed just by the military and West Point, and really now the fact that women, were in military services and the academies. It just kind of caught my attention. And so after that, I did end up applying to West Point, Annapolis, and the Air Force Academy, simply because it just felt like that was something that was important to me. Another thing that kind of happened coincidingly with that, there was one of the first big miniseries on TV was called The Holocaust. And it was, of course, about, Nazi Germany. And again, just being a young boy, I remember how terrible it was to watch that. And I remember telling myself that, I will never let that happen here. And so just at a very young age, those two things came together, and the academies just seemed like the place to go, what I wanted to do. So that's the noble side of it.
Yeah.
Now, fast forward to my junior year, long hair, T-shirts, it's like,
This is junior year of high school that we're talking about.
Junior year of high school.
Okay.
Yeah. Junior year of high school. And, I don't even know if I want to go to college. I had some really good scholarships towards the end of the year, and I said, I don't want to do that. I just want to go join the Peace Corps, So I turned down almost all of my appointments and all my colleges. I said, I'm going off to go to the Peace Corps. So I literally contacted someone I knew from the Peace Corps, and this is exactly what he said to me. He goes, "Young man, we need people with skills. You need to go to college." And I was like, was I just turned down by the Peace Corps? Sure enough, I was. And so then I had to kind of do a little bit of backtracking and try to figure out where I wanted to go. And believe it or not, this was the end of my decision making, was that Air Force Academy is free and it's close to skiing. That sounds like a good place to go.
Wow.
But I'll tell you, the moment I walked through those gates and started meeting the people at the academy, I was in. And so I often say that my life is a series of just really good mistakes. And that was one of them.
Yeah.
I went and it just made an amazing career with amazing people.
Well, I mean, for those that don't know, getting into the academy, any service academy, whether it's West Point, Air Force Academy, Naval Academy, I mean, wildly competitive.
Yeah.
It's small numbers that they're bringing in every year. The requirements are insane.
It's tough.
Typically it requires a letter from a senator or elected official and great grades. And it's some very difficult doors to get through. And so, the fact that you put it bluntly, that you were able to get picked up and go, is a huge testament to you and your upbringing, first of all, Todd, and then probably to your work ethic as, a junior and senior in high school. But yeah, I mean, tell the audience a little bit about just getting into the academy for a second.
Well, I'm probably going to sound overly humble here, but I truly mean it. I think I was fairly lucky in many ways. Growing up in Idaho Springs, I was a big fish in a small pond. I simply was. My parents and I talked about me possibly, going live with my grandparents or someone else who was in a bigger district, who had more, more influential Congress people and stuff, and we decided not to.
Huh.
And I think the fact that I grew up in Idaho Springs, where you just simply did not have enough students to do all the things the school needs for sports and extracurricular activities. I mean, I played football, played baseball, played basketball, ran track, skied, was on drama, was on student council. We were able to do everything. And I believe that really stood out. If I had gone to Evergreen High School or Conifer or Columbine or something, I don't think I would have stood out as much. I simply don't.
Yeah.
And also I think it was just the confidence and support of that small little group of friends, that we had, ultimately changed it. So yeah, I give myself a little bit of credit. School was easy to me. I was a, fairly good athlete. I ended up playing football at the academy for a year. It was really more that, I think, is that really made me stand out. I was fortunate to be able to have that small little microcosm where things stood out. And I'll tell you that most of the people that I met at the academies and I met throughout the military, a lot of them come from small little towns and have those values and have those principles that they bring with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, John, you mentioned hard work. I mean, Todd, your exposure to different socioeconomic classes and things, blue collar, white collar, growing up in that small town, I'm sure, seeing that from early ages helped instill strong work ethic, especially the mining community. I mean, they work long hours in harsh conditions. And what they have to do to help produce things that we need is just incredible. And then the academic side, and you said you had some family members with engineering backgrounds and things like that. So I think that sort of coalescence of both sides sort of helped shape you into who you are, and then leading into this academy as a long-haired, sort of directionless high schooler. So tell us how that started to transform. Once you got into the academy, there's probably a little more structure than what you were used to. So share that experience.
Well, it's funny. I hear so many people say, well, I never would have, not me, but they say, I would never have made it through the academy. I was like, you'd be surprised how many people, yeah, there's structure and there's rigor, but I'll tell you what you notice most is that camaraderie. Our flights were roughly 15 to 20 people, kids basically. And you're thrown into this and here you go. All of a sudden you have no hair left. You're literally out of shade for 30 seconds. You got cuts all over your face and everything. You're just thrown into this environment. And it was more that feeling, I think, of once again, being back in a small little town. This is my little team. This is my little group. Yeah, that just felt great. And so really all the other stuff was almost secondary to it. And in a way, it made it kind of fun. Believe it or not, I mean, I look back in my freshman year, it was hands down one of the funnest years I've ever had.
Nice.
Simply because we're making just a really great situation out of bad conditions.
Okay.
I never realized, just listening to you talk, Todd, I never realized the correlation that you had between a small town, close family and friends, hard work, that you're having to experience on a daily basis because that's just part of being in a small town. But taking that and going straight into the academy where all those things carry over into your new environment.
Yeah.
Small environment, tight-knit group, everybody's counting on everybody. You're only as strong as the weakest link in your group, and you're learning to just get things done together. So, man, it seems, for somebody outside of the timeline, it may seem kind of, non-correlative, but man, it now is making sense to me how your transformation was so natural.
Yeah, and one of the greatest skills, and it's funny, I didn't even realize this until probably about 10 years or so ago, was, when you grow up in a small little town and you get in a fight, you still gotta be friends tomorrow. You still have to keep living with this person.
Yeah.
And that was something I think that was kind of eye-opening to me, is when I saw the way people handle conflict if they don't know each other well, or they don't have that awareness that, hey, we are still part of a team, and the team comes over whatever this conflict is. And so, for instance, we joke about, like, we got a class of the entire district was less than 600 students, so each class had about 40 students. And many of these people you do since kindergarten, so you're all like rotating boyfriends and girlfriends around, and you've dated a girl like 6 times in that period of time. But you're still friends, and you break up, and it was just a skill again that I just never really appreciated or recognized until later. That ability to have respectful truth, where I'm upset with Michael, I'm upset with John, but it's in a way that we're friends, and we're past it. And you know what? Well, we're continuing to build the team, and that just came in so handy in special operations and just everything I've done, since then. Is that ability to have those difficult conversations with people you consider friends.
It's okay to disagree. I mean, that's
Amen.
I think we forget that sometimes in life, that we can disagree and still be friends. That's a great point.
Yeah, and there's a way to do it. I mean, there's a way to do it, so it has to be respectful.
Yeah.
But once you kind of learn that skill, and then people feel more comfortable, around you, and you feel more comfortable around them when things do come up.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you make your way through the Air Force Academy, graduate as an officer in the Air Force, and then spend the next 22 years serving the country in various aviation roles. I'm sure that felt like 22 years in some moments and felt like 22 seconds in other moments, that entire period. But share some of the highlights of your experience as an aviator, as well as some of the tougher moments that we touched on in the intro, if you're willing to share.
Yeah, sure. And I will say it didn't feel long at all until the very last year. The very last year was a trying one. Everything else in between really was just an amazing experience. So I really had no intention to fly. I didn't have my pilot waiver or anything else. We were given an opportunity. A few of us were given an opportunity to try out for what was then going to be pararescue, combat rescue officers. They ended up stopping the program right before I hit my senior year. So I hit my senior year, not quite knowing what I'm going to do in the Air Force. They said, "Hey, do you want to go fly?" I'm like, well, "All right, sure." It is the Air Force afterwards. And I said, "I want to go fly helicopters." Well, because the time the time had already passed to apply for helicopters, I couldn't apply for helicopter school anymore. So I always say I had to go fly jets. so I got into pilot training, became an instructor pilot. Was teaching young people how to fly as my very first assignment, which I will say is probably one of the best assignments you can get, because you just become such a foundational flyer. You just have to focus on the basics. And you're teaching the basics. And so it really, I'm so grateful for that experience, even though I wasn't really happy not going operational. I was so grateful for that experience because it just hands down made me a much better pilot, in the long run. I wasn't really happy with flying jets, as they started to move our assignments, it looked like probably a fighter was coming down my path. And it's the end of the Cold War. And just to be honest, I just didn't really like the mentality, It was Top Gun had just come out, and I hate to admit it, I was that dude with, mirrored sunglasses and everything. If there's a pile of sand someplace, I'm playing volleyball in it. It just didn't feel good. And so the Cold War just ended. They're letting pilots out right and left. And I had the opportunity to get out, but I was like, no, I really do enjoy flying. I really enjoy leadership. I enjoy being in the military, but I just can't keep doing this. Well, they had mismanaged our special operations forces at that point, because in special operations, you have to go through at least one full assignment before you can go fly. And so since so many pilots had gotten out, all of a sudden, like, oh, geez, we have no pilots. And I call this my really true second act. is when I went and volunteered. There was 15 slots, and I was one of the first fixed-wing pilots, jet pilots, go volunteer to go fly helicopters. And I was literally counseled up and down my chain of command, like, what are you doing, Lancaster? Why do you want to go fly helicopters? You don't get a leather jacket. You don't get the flight bonus. They're considered second-rate citizens. I mean, literally, that's what Air Force officers are telling me. But
all true.
It's what I wanted to do. I stuck to my guns, and it was just absolutely wonderful. You're going off, you're flying the H-53, the special ops version of the 53. I just found my place. We were so mission focused. It was very much focused on building the team and getting the job done. Met hands down some of these best people I've ever met in my life in special operations. The missions and just traveling all over the world, doing very interesting things. My family being able to travel with me a lot of times. It just opened doors to just a tremendous amount of opportunity, tremendous amount of awareness. Most of the work we did was not with U.S. forces. It was with special forces of other countries, helping to build their capabilities. So we really got to see a lot of these cultures from their point of view. And when you're in another country, living and working with the people from that country and reflecting back on the United States, we're seeing the United States through TV and shows and things like that. You get a whole different awareness about how the world sees us, for better or for worse. Better or for worse.
For the non-military folks, including myself, special forces, special operations can be Marine Recon, it could be Delta Force, it could be Navy SEALs, it could be Rangers, it could be Green Berets. Are you supporting all of those groups or a specific group of the special?
Yes.
Okay.
We support that whole wide range, from SEALs Team 6, Delta Force, all the way down to Green Berets, or assist Marine Special Operations. See the whole wide spectrum. Now, we have primary responsibilities that we were dedicated to, that if they needed us, then no one else could have us. But for the most part, during normal training, we were working with any special forces.
And did you yourself have to do some specialized aviation training related to special forces, special operations teams, or is it a pretty standard practice and it just because of, I guess, whatever's open in the military, and forgive my ignorance here, that's sort of the direction you went in your aviation career?
Every time someone goes into what we call a major weapon system, so F-16s, F-22s, H-53s, you have to go through a very specific school for that. Our school for what was called the Pablo was over 9 months long. It was one of the longest training schools that we had in the Air Force because of the complexity of the mission.
Okay.
Now, once we were off flying, primarily most of our flying's done night low level, is then we had additional qualifications too. So, John, believe it or not, I was shipboard qualified, spent almost 6 months on ships. So as an Air Force guy, that's way too much time. Night water qualified, air refueling qualified. So we had a lot of different qualifications. one very unique qualification I had is in the DMZ between North and South Korea, at Pyongyang, there's actually an airfield, a little air pad there. And each side has the legal right to fly helicopters into that pad and land. North Korea never exercised their right. We did because we wanted to be able to keep, so there's never a surprise when the helicopter's going up to land in the DMZ. And so I was one of the few people qualified to go up and land, in the DMZ.
Interesting.
So that was kind of neat. So yeah, lots of refined special training to be able to meet the demands of special operations.
Very cool.
And I'll say to Todd, and you kind of alluded to this earlier. One of the cool things about military aviation is we all think we know what we want to do when we get into the military. For me, Marine Corps, and as aviators, we all think we have our platform figured out. But the amazing thing is when we get into that community and we start getting trained and we become specialized, that community opens up and it's accepting of us, and we accept it and we conform to the group that it's around us. And so whether it is fighters or tankers or helicopters or, whatever transport, you take on that personality and you become the community that is supporting you. And it's so impressive to talk to somebody who thought they wanted jets, 20 years ago, and then ended up flying helicopters for 20 years. And they think, man, I couldn't have picked a better community, And so it's a very cool thing for those of you that don't get to experience it, to take on that persona and take on that. Because every community is significantly different.
Yeah.
But yet we're all there to support one another. We're all there to support the warfighter on the ground. And we're all there to support our freedoms that we have here in the States.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, there's even kind of a third act in here too, that, as I'd already been a squadron commander, but Afghanistan, we weren't actually flying with the Afghans. They were letting them try to rebuild their Air Force and Air Corps around 2007, but it just wasn't happening. So I was asked to go to Afghanistan and went to Ukraine for about 4 months to learn how to fly Mi-17 helicopters from ex-Soviet pilots. And then I was in Afghanistan. It was me, a Canadian pilot, a Navy pilot, a Czech pilot, Hungarian pilot, a Marine gunny, and an Air Force Master Sergeant. We were the only coalition people flying with the Afghans. So we had interpreters. They didn't speak English. We didn't speak Dari. And so we're flying in combat with interpreters, for a year over in Afghanistan. And that was just a whole different, perspective of the world. And really geopolitics, that's when my eyes really opened up to a lot of the trials and tribulations of geopolitics, unfortunately.
Imagine being the first person to ever send a payment over the internet. New things can be scary, and crypto is no different. It's new, but like the internet, it's also revolutionary. Making your first crypto trade feels easy with 24/7 support when you need it. Go to Kraken.com and see what crypto can be. Not investment advice. Crypto trading involves risk of loss. Cryptocurrency services are provided to U.S. and U.S. territory customers by Payward Ventures Inc. PVI DBA Kraken. Visit PVI's disclosures at kraken.com/legal/disclosures.
So, Todd, you have successfully surmised 20 years, 22 years in the Air Force for us in 5 minutes. And you referred to it, as one of the acts, but the next act is after 22 years in the Air Force, you pivot out of the military and into public school system as a superintendent. So what was the decision point that led you out of the military into retirement and go into public schools? Because as I've talked about on the show, that's a very transformational time for anybody that spends that long in the military. And you've got the world's offerings on your plate, where to live, what to do, who your friends are going to be. And you chose, public school system. Tell me about that transition.
Yeah, so one, the catalyst was I had just become an 06, just pinned on 06, And long story short is for most people to keep your colonel rank, you have to stay in it for at least 3 years. And then you can retire as a colonel. If not, you go back. But they had a force shaping policy that just come into place. And so I was literally like 3 to 4 months pinned on. They said any colonel of the Air Force can get out if they want to and maintain their rank. And so literally, like, my wife was traveling in Colorado. I called her. I said, I want out. I don't want to keep waiting around to try to make general or see what's happening. I said, I want to get out. And so we made the decision overnight to get out. Now, I had known all throughout my career that I wanted to get into education. I had a master's education. Even though I was operational, I always sought out instructional opportunities. So I was a platform instructor, course instructor pilot. I was the commander of the 551st, the Special Operations Schoolhouse. So I was really running curriculum, modifying curriculum. Afghanistan, we built their training program. Ended up teaching leadership at the Marine Corps University for a year at the Marine War College. So education was always a big part of me and my background, because I knew when I got out of the military, I wanted to get an education. Now, when I planned to have a little bit more runway before I got out. So I started doing research, and I was thinking, probably a principal would be a good place for me to enter, with my leadership background. But I found out in Colorado, in order to get a principal certificate, you have to have taught for 2 years. So I couldn't do that. So then I started looking at charter schools and alternative education, because they had different requirements. And while I was doing that, I started seeing these jobs in smaller districts for superintendent. I said, well, what do you need to be a superintendent? Nothing. There were no requirements to become a superintendent. I said, well, that sounds interesting. Let me give that a shot. And I figured in terms of leadership skills, it would kind of fit my leadership skills a little bit better, in the sense of larger organizations, the politics of it, and then so on and so forth. And so I started applying to a couple of them and ended up getting hired at a small little district, Antonito, down in southern Colorado. And that's how I got my foot in the door.
And just to be clear, there's no specialty requirements. I mean, there's still probably a profile of a person that meets certain standards that they're looking for in terms of running a district or a school, right? I mean,
it's not really.
You have to be breathing.
You have to have a pulse. I don't know. You can't. It's got to be a little more complex. I think you're underselling it a bit, maybe. But
well, I don't mean disrespect it in any way. No, there really are no requirements, and so in the 90s and early 2000s, you actually saw a lot of districts turning towards non-traditional superintendents, for different ways to look at running schools and approaching education.
Okay.
And so there was a series. John Barry was the superintendent of Aurora Public Schools at that point. He's a retired Air Force 2-star. I can't remember. There's an Army colonel retired up in Northwest. So there was quite a few of us that came in from non-traditional backgrounds.
Gotcha.
And so every once in a while, I'd say probably less than 10% of any state's superintendent's force is from non-traditional, whether that's business or military or something else. And the intent there, again, is we think a little bit differently. We're bringing a different perspective, into the education system. I think they should do more of it. I mean, I don't think it should ever be more than 25%, but I can definitely say that we fundamentally approached education and the process of education differently than traditional superintendents.
Well, I mean, to support your line of thinking there, I mean, your time as superintendent, your district wins excellence in education, being an outsider to some extent, wins that award. So first, congrats on that accomplishment. But
I do.
You are also spending time bringing small and medium-sized business leaders together as a side job while you're running a school district, or so tell us how things are sort of shaping up post-military with the superintendent role, and then some of the other things you start to get going on.
Yeah, that was a byproduct really of after. So let me go through the education portion first. Is one of the most eye-opening things when I came into education, and as I say this again, I mean no disrespect towards the people inside the system. I think the people were really good. The system itself, it's somewhat dysfunctional. I've never seen a system so pitted against itself, where almost every stakeholder has their own self-interest that is opposing the self-interest of other people, stakeholders. And so I just saw, this is a broad brushstroke, the levels of trust inside our education systems are so low, that it's really hard to make meaningful progress. So part of that, I believe, is, and we'll go back and compare it to the military. You get 1,000 lieutenants in the military. 1,000 lieutenants are going through leadership training. 500 are going to make it to captain. Okay, 500 then go through leadership training for the next level. 250 of them are going to make, lieutenant colonel. They're going to go through leadership training. So it's this constant leadership development. Now, I'm not saying the military did everything perfect. There were bad leaders inside the military, but at least every leader was given the tools, okay, and was intentionally developed to try to reach the next level of leadership. Just was non-existent inside education. Just non-existent. There was technical leadership development, like how to put a budget together, how to make a curriculum and things like that. But there was not leadership in the sense of how do you build trust in a system that is low in trust? How do you go out and intentionally engage stakeholders? I firmly believed that the school is the lifeblood of that community, even more so in small towns.
Yeah.
Okay. But only about 25% of any community has anything to do with the school, whether it's kids or some sort of relationship with the school. So 75% about any community just has nothing to do with their schools. And I think that's categorically wrong. The school should be intentionally moving out into the communities and being a member and a part and parcel to that community, whether you have kids in school or not, because that community depends on the schools. So I started to see this lack of leadership, this lack of strategic leadership, of really understanding the broader meaning of leadership. I saw most educators just sitting in their classroom or sitting in their school, just kind of heads down in their little area. And I just felt that I wanted to fix that. And so as I kind of neared my tenure and was getting a little bit frustrated with the politics, a good friend of mine said, you could probably do a lot better on the outside than inside the system. So that's when I got out and started doing executive coaching and leadership coaching, did a lot of work inside the community colleges, tech schools, which, by the way, I have a tremendous amount of respect for our community colleges and tech schools. I think they're our safety net for those kids that unfortunately fall through the cracks, K through 12. We do have this very robust system of community colleges and tech schools. It gives them a second chance when they start to believe in themselves again. And so I was just so thankful for seeing that. And then that kind of led to jobs, with corporate and nonprofits. And it started to kind of spread out into what I do today.
Very cool.
As you're talking about, coming into the school system and shaking it up from an outsider's perspective, I think about one of our previous secretaries of defense, Robert McNamara, who back around previous to Vietnam War, he comes in as Secretary of Defense, but before he was Secretary of Defense, he was running Ford Motor Company.
Yep.
And he comes in with this idea of shaking things up, making it more like the industry, civilian industry, not the military. And I think that's such a good perspective for somebody to come in that's not institutionalized, hasn't been a school teacher for 20 years, that's always done things a certain way, but comes in from a military background or comes in from a different community that can look at things with eyes wide open and see the places that we've missed. In the military, I always talked about to junior officers, when they take a new role, always come in and ask questions. We in the military, we get new jobs every year or two. We transition from logistics to operations, or operations to maintenance, or maintenance to, some other field. And I always thought it was the best time to come in. As little, it's the time the least about that job. And you come in and you should always ask why. Why do we do things this way?
Yeah.
Why is that thing there? What does this do? Because it makes other people, one, explain what they're doing, which gives them either a greater sense of knowledge, or it shakes up why we've done things in the past.
Yeah.
And it kind of highlights those things that could be fixed or things that need to be changed. And so I just really applaud, your openness to come into, education, even though you had a desire to get into education, but come in from that military perspective and start asking those questions.
Yeah. My goal was, from the teacher's perspective as well, I was shooting to try to get about 20 to 25% of our teachers from non-traditional backgrounds as well. And so there's a lot of retired military out there. There's a lot of retired business people that want to keep giving back. And so I saw two benefits to it. First, if you're a small district up in the mountains of Colorado, bordering Jeffco or bordering Denver, you keep your teachers for a couple of years, they go off to another school district, they can get paid more. They're up and coming, they got to make a living. But you get a retired business person or retired military or something else, they already got that foundation, so they don't need to worry about the money. But now they're contributing a tremendous amount more experience, okay, to a K through 12 experience than the others could. So I think there needs to be a balance of professional educators, okay, with though people that are actually bringing real world experiences into the classroom that's outside of kind of the education bubble.
Yeah. Todd, you touched on earlier the hard skills, the technical skills, but as an outsider coming into something new, the soft skills are almost more important because you have to be able to build those relationships and trust, like you said. And a great example, I think, of that absence of soft skills is when a guy named Bob Nardelli took over Home Depot a decade or two ago. He was an old GE guy, had risen through the ranks there and came in, and everything's about data and metrics and this and that, and didn't, I think about the other dimensions of running a business when it comes to building those relationships, creating a great culture, building an amazing team. It was just about the numbers. So I think there's two pieces that need to work sort of harmoniously for that to be effective.
Yeah. I always say, leaders, and this is a lot what I do just last week working with an executive team, here in Denver, is, the leaders are responsible for getting results, period. That's the only reason you're paid is to get results. Okay. Now, you get results by a combination of, strategy and execution. And I always say, well, if it was that easy, then why does never get the results they want? So there's kind of parentheses, around strategy and execution, and you've got this variable of people. Everything you're doing has to be done by and through your people. And if leaders aren't paying attention to that people factor, they're just not going to get the results they want. Yeah. And I keep saying life would be so much easier if it worked for the people involved, right? Well, we have to involve the people, and leaders that do not pay attention to that are not going to get the results they want, and more likely than not can get minimum results at best.
Yeah, 100%.
Now, Todd, in your bio, you use the term, and this is kind of along the lines of what we're talking about right now, but you use the term growing into yourself. And you do so over the course of your life journey. So for our audience who may have had their shares of ups and downs and are probably facing all the normal fears and trepidation in facing the next chapter of their life, what thoughts or personal anecdotes or advice do you have and you want to give them in their journey?
We are so much more capable of doing things than our mind lets us believe. And I was very fortunate, again, stupid little kid growing up in Idaho Springs, going off in the military. And what it did really well was just keep challenging you until all of a sudden, you look back, wow, I've done all those things. I never thought I could have done those things. And so one, it gives you a certain amount of efficacy and confidence that I can do these, but also it starts to open your mind up to, well, why can't I go try that? Why can't I go do this? Why can't I go be a superintendent?
Yeah.
And you just ask yourself, what's limiting yourself? It's usually us. We're usually the limiting factor. Okay. There are some physical disabilities and things like that, but for the most part, there's a mental limitation that is holding us back. And so that's the number one. That's why I love doing coaching and stuff, is when you see that aha moment. And, I think one of my principles is from the military is mutual support. I believe we should all go through life in the idea of mutual support. We all need help, and we should all be giving help along the way. We're all in this together. And the more that I think we do that as an act of service, an act of grace, the better we feel, and the more we help people along the way. And so that's why I really enjoy the coaching side. When all of a sudden you see a leader get it, and they give themselves permission, not to be a jackass leader. They can be a really good, caring leader and get good results. When you see that come on, and all of a sudden they feel better about themselves, and they feel better about the way they're running their company, that's a great moment. That's a really great moment in life. And so that concept of growing into yourself, if you just constantly keep the growth bubble out in front of you and keep asking yourself, what else can I do? What else can I do? You will constantly keep growing, and you look back and be surprised at the person you've become over time.
Wow.
I love that, Todd. And, I shared this quote recently that I found pretty powerful. Remember, whenever you're in a position to help someone, be glad and always do it, because that's the universe answering someone else's prayers through you. Yeah. And I just thought that was pretty spectacular.
I started the episode off with a quote, and it was a winner is a loser who tried one more time. And, Todd, as you are actively coaching people, I was going to just say, as we bring things to a close, what's your thought on coaching people to keep pursuing, regardless of maybe some of the outside influences that are trying to deter them, or maybe their own success hasn't caught up to their efforts? What would you coach them on in continuing?
Yeah, so it's like a little mantra I have is first of all, forgive yourself. Second, look beyond the threats. Okay, and third, see the opportunities. And one of the biggest things, is you think about, like, particularly my age, there's a lot of mistakes that pile up behind me. a lot of mistakes. Probably the best, not probably, I know the best thing I was able to do, and it was right about the time I got divorced, was forgive myself for those mistakes. And I firmly believe that nobody intentionally makes a mistake. In hindsight, you can say, well, maybe I ought not have done that. But at that time, I firmly believe everyone is making the best decision they can based on the information and the experiences they've had. Okay. So what is that forgiveness, that ability to be able to take a step back and say, you know what? Yeah, I do screw that up looking back. What am I going to do about it? Okay. Second is looking past the threats. Our mind is either in fight or flight mode, or it's looking for opportunity. And we spend so much time in fight or flight mode, thinking about the next thing that's coming down, worrying about this and worrying about that. Okay, our mind does exactly what the human mind is designed to do. It narrows into the threat and it tries to solve that threat. But then if all you see is threats, well, you move from that threat just to another threat. And It's all this very narrow vision of what you have to deal with. When you stop seeing the world as a threat, then all of a sudden your mind opens up to opportunity. And that's where the human brain just does amazing things. Okay? When you get beyond forgiveness, you get beyond threats, and you say, okay, what else is out there? Like I was dealing with a friend of mine just yesterday. She's looking at buying a new condo. She has all the means she does to get whatever she wants. Okay? But she's going back and forth like, do I or don't I? Do I or don't I? So she's in threat mode. I said, hey, why don't you go look at 3 houses? Look at 3 different things. And now that she's looked at 3 different things, the mind automatically looks open, starts to find more opportunities. Yeah. And so she's out of the binary either or, and she's off into this, wow, I'd never even thought about maybe doing that or doing this. And then the mind just starts searching for more and more solutions. And so that's really just the basic little formula I use when I coach people, or even with myself. I start to feel something. Well, what am I shaming myself for? Okay, what's the threat that I see, and let me get across to the other opportunity on the other side to be able to grow again.
That's good,
Todd. I love the perspective and some of the transparency you've brought today, and your experience, your journey, the different acts that you've been on in your journey, and helping remind everyone that we're humans and to connect on a human-to-human level. So thank you for sharing all that today. For listeners who are interested in learning more about the things you're up to, or just want to connect with you, maybe they heard something you said and want to just talk to you one-on-one, what's the best way for them to do that?
Probably the best way is just contact me through LinkedIn.
Okay.
Todd Lancaster at vistagechair.com. Feel free to reach out anytime.
Awesome. Well, we wish you all the best. Thank you for taking time out. I hope you're feeling a little bit better. Hopefully we injected some energy into you through this discussion, and you're ready to close out the rest of the day on a healthier note. But we really appreciate you hopping on and sharing your story with us, Todd.
And we didn't talk too much aviation for those of you who are rolling your eyes at 2 pilots over here, just chatting away. So.
Well, Michael, I think it was really serendipitous that you and I met, and I really appreciate, you invite me on. John, this is the most time I spent in the Marine in a long time, and I enjoyed it.
Awesome. That says a lot. Thank you, Todd. Well, man, for Michael and I, we do truly appreciate what you've done in service to our country,
Yep.
in service to those youngsters who are going through the educational system, who maybe are just firing on all cylinders or just need special attention because they're not, it doesn't resonate with them, and they need somebody like you that steps in outside of education and kind of helps, re-guide them into what, they're supposed to be doing. So thank you for that. But really just, we appreciate you being on the show and sharing your stories with us. So appreciate it. So that sounds like a wrap for us.
Yeah.
We look forward to connecting every week, this week and next week, with every one of our listeners. Please, if you could, drop us a comment, like and subscribe to this episode, and we will be with you next week. So, see ya.
See ya. Thanks.
The Second Act with Michael and John stars Michael Newborn and John Ballinger. The podcast is produced by Seltzer Kings. For more information on the show, check out michaelandjohn.com, or if you'd like to get involved in the conversation, give the guys a shout on their socials at The Second Act with Michael and John on most platforms. Thanks for listening.
Seltzer Kings.
Podcasts.